What if you could help others to find the power to heal themselves? Physically, emotionally, and spiritually.
When I started teaching my classes, it was in 2002, and I was just doing the past life regressions and contacting the subconscious part. But then as the time went on and we found how powerful this was and what we could do with it, a lot of the students began saying, you know, advanced past life regression doesn't really tell what it's all about. This is so much more than that. We think you should change the name. So it was a few years ago we decided to change the name to Quantum Healing Hypnosis Technique. And this is the healing technique that we've now been teaching it, well, since 2002, that's 12 years.
What if you could time travel with them? Visit mythical places or angelic realms, other worlds, other galaxies. Help others to speak to their higher selves. You can. Dolores has taught thousands of people from across the world how to use QHHT, and now you can learn her method by going directly to dolorescannon.com. And don't forget to mention the discount code MORETALKS. Hi guys, my name's Kevin Moore and I'm the host of The Moore Show. Now it's my purpose, my passion, my mission to help you guys become your greatest version. Now you might be looking to find answers on love, connecting with your life's purpose, reuniting with a loved one on the other side, discovering your past lives, or just helping you make sense in finding your direction. Now, as a multi-dimensional channel, I can connect with higher aspects of yourself to help you in this present moment to become your best version and live your most empowered life. Now, you can book myself for a reading by going to tmspsychics.com/Kevin, or you can get a reading from one of my many gifted team of readers. The Moore Show Psychics, helping you transform your present moment to the most loving and happiest it can be. Now I also offer a full money back guarantee, so what have you got to lose? Empower your life today. From the UK and across the world online. You're now watching The Moore Show and I'm your host Kevin Moore. Now for the next hour I'll be covering subjects that will open up your mind and provide you with information you may have never heard before. Now on today's show I'm about to be joined by my guest Stephen Gray. Now Stephen is a writer on spiritual subjects. He has worked extensively with Tibetan Buddhism, the Native American Church, and is the author of Returning to the Sacred World, a spiritual toolkit for the emerging reality. And he's also a conference and workshop organizer, leader, speaker, as well as a part-time photographer and music composer. He joins me from Vancouver, British Columbia. Stephen Gray, welcome to the show.
Happy to be here, Kevin.
It's great to have you on, my friend. Great to have you on. Okay, let's get straight into your work, because this is going to be an interesting interview in the 51 minutes we've got. Cannabis and spirituality. This is going to be an interesting interview because in my interviews I talk a lot about my addiction problems. Well, I try to be transparent and I've got all my addictions now. I really do feel I'm in a much better place. Right. One of them, with living in Amsterdam, was definitely an addiction to pot, marijuana, cannabis, whatever you want to call it. Maybe I had to go through that when I went over there. I mean, it wasn't before I went over to Amsterdam, because in England it's obviously illegal. So we'll get into that side of it in just a bit. But first of all, because obviously I know you do talk about that side. But first of all, why do this book? Why did you write this book?
Yeah, okay, so, excuse me. I've been involved with psychedelics or entheogenic medicines, you might call them, for a long time. And I wrote in a previous book about 6-7 years ago, was published, called Returning to Sacred World. And that introduced me to a bunch of people that got me involved in co-organizing a conference on all these psychedelics, or whatever you want to call them, in Vancouver, called the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference. Met a lot of really interesting people through that. At a certain point, it dawned on me that hardly anyone was talking about cannabis as a spiritual medicine, despite the fact that when you look into the historical record, this plant has a very ancient and widespread spiritual use on Earth, and so that I started to think that this was an oversight, an issue that had not been addressed properly in the current culture, and that it needed redressing. And I got some support from some very interesting people that were willing to contribute to it, and it just kind of fell into place over the last 4 or 5 years. So again, the mission of the book is to acknowledge that when used skillfully, and that bears on this issue that you were talking about a moment ago about misuse and healthy use and happy use versus the opposite. And excuse me. So I just felt like this needed attention, because obviously cannabis its use has been spreading rapidly throughout cultures and around the world, but very few people understand. And this is something we should probably get into, how it can be used as a spiritual ally. That's the genesis of the book.
Right, yes, absolutely. Look, I've obviously had people who have dealt with ayahuasca, different types of drugs as well, to get into that space, to connect to their soul, to connect to the, whatever you want to term it, that part of you that always is and always will be. Is this part of the journey of using a drug like cannabis to get into that experience, to get in contact with that inner voice?
Yeah, that's one way of putting it. I've worked a lot, as I say, with the other entheogens like ayahuasca and others, and so I have some understanding of the similarities and differences between those and cannabis. And of course, they're all a little different anyway. Between each other, but cannabis is kind of in its own category. I would call it an entheogen, though. For people not familiar with that term, entheogen, it comes from the Greek, and it basically means generating the divine within. And it's been used in the last 2 or 3 decades in a lot of situations as a replacement for psychedelic, because although the word itself is an excellent word in terms of its literal meaning, it has still some baggage associated with it. So anyway, cannabis should be, on some level, considered an entheogen as well. And again, this comes back to skillful use. And when you say contacting the inner voice, I wouldn't put it quite like that myself. Cannabis is an amplifier, an energizer, and so it's like a gift from the gods, as it were, or from the spirit of the plant, and it then depends on what you do with it. It's a gift that's very easy to misuse, and a lot of people don't understand what it's really capable of doing. But when you use it skillfully, when you know how to direct that energy, then the energizing amplification function can open up the system. So in a sense, you might call it a nowness substance. It's not as likely to, in most cases, although it's certainly possible, to have complete otherworldly experiences, out-of-body experiences, intense visualization experiences, etc. Those are at the extreme end of it, and usually only accessed through oral ingestion, like drinking or eating it. But for the most part, I would say that it's more of a nowness medication or medicine, in the sense that when you know how to channel that energy, it opens up the system. It can open up your system, and that can bring you more deeply into the present. It can open up your heart. It can teach you how to trust the energy of this moment rather than relying on secondhand information, as the way my Buddhist teachings, I used to be a student of Buddhism, they used to talk about how actually, Buddhists were very elaborative about that whole issue. That basically the illusory self, the individual that thinks itself separate from everything, kind of builds a world from concepts, from beliefs. It's all in the head, in a sense, right? It's all the stories that you've generated and taken on from your parents and your culture and so on. And it's all secondhand information. It's like, oh, this is right, this is wrong, this is real, this is not real, etc., etc. Whereas, as I understand it, spiritual awakening involves a gradual process of shifting your focus or allegiance away from these secondhand kind of stories toward trusting the unconditioned intelligence of the whole organism. And this is where cannabis has the potential to be an ally because of the amplification process or function that it has. So it has to do with how you channel it. And we should talk a little at some point about, some good ways to do that. But I'll just leave it there for the moment and let you.
Okay. Used to make me very paranoid.
Yeah, it's an important thing we could talk about too.
Yeah.
There's some reasons for that.
Yeah. Well, maybe I was paranoid without it, and maybe it just amplified what was already there.
Exactly.
Maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I would say so. I addressed it in the book actually. Excuse me. So I wouldn't say that's necessarily the only reason that people get paranoid from cannabis. However, if you think about it like this, if you think about the sort of our spiritual reality or our life like this, it might fit or it might make more sense. So this requires a brief description of ego from the spiritual point of view. Or I was a student of, as I said, Tibetan Buddhism for a long time, so I really like Buddhist language to describe these things. So and it's not just Buddhism, and I'm not trying to create a case for the exclusivity of Buddhism or anything here, just that they have good language for these things. And so ego, as I mentioned a moment ago, is this illusion that we are separate from everything and that life is this sort of struggle to maintain yourself all the time and sort of keep this package tight, My old Buddhist teacher called it the cocoon, that we always feel like we have to protect ourselves, keep ourselves within this safe little space, But it's a process of constant struggle. It requires constant maintenance. The cocoon is always developing rips and leaks, and we always feel like we have to keep patching it up again. So the spiritual awakening process is allowing that cocoon to, in a sense, dissolve. But that's frightening because we're completely, most of us, to one degree or another. And when I say ego, we're not necessarily talking about egotistical here, like having a big ego, That's a related but slightly separate issue because you could be what appears to the outside world as not an egotistical person, like kind of quiet or reserved or shy or whatever, and you're just as fully in the grip of ego as Donald Trump, although he might be at one extreme end of the continuum there in certain respects. So the ego is this kind of construction, even the psychologist, the great psychologist people nailed that one. Sigmund Freud and his protégés called it the false or provisional personality that we put together to survive with, right? So we're identified with that. We're addicted or attached to the status quo of this sort of identity that we've created. So the spiritual awakening journey is learning how to relax and let go of that tight little package that we've created. So what cannabis does, again, on this amplification principle, is it, in a sense, shocks the monkey out of that, depending partly on dosage, of course, and so on. And because of that, or as part of that, it functions to some degree as a truth serum. So it's actually showing you, this is again where it has this remarkable potential as a spiritual ally, actually showing you reality, in a sense. And so part of that reality is that this package you've put together is not real. And so you see that, the personality, the persona that you take out into the world to meet the world with doesn't hold water. And so you start to feel like you're exposed, you feel vulnerable. And if you're not comfortable with that, you become fearful. As Joan Bellow, one of the contributors to the book, says, cannabis makes the world larger, but also less predictable. And a lot of people are not comfortable with that. And if I may say so again, that's where how you actually work with the plant is so important, because if you paranoia or fear lives in thought. I don't know if you've ever heard of Krishnamurti, the old spiritual teacher, J. Krishnamurti. Anyway, it doesn't matter. He coined that phrase, or he nailed it. Fear lives in thought, right? So your thoughts can become amplified with cannabis. Fear can become amplified. And paranoia is really just kind of a story that you build around your fear, like, oh, I'm under threat of some kind, But the key with both just spiritual practice in general and with working with cannabis is you don't buy into those thoughts. You maybe recognize it, acknowledge it, but then you keep breathing, keep paying attention, relax. Similar with these larger or major entheogens, you just have to work, you have to surrender to the energy of that medicine and not fall prey to believing your thought process when it involves things like fear and self-doubt and so on. They're just thoughts. That's a basic spiritual teaching, right? Just thoughts arise, let them go. Thoughts arise, let them go again. Thoughts arise, let them go another time, right? Okay, so does that make some sense about the paranoia issue?
The More Show connects personal development, metaphysics, and consciousness tools for transformation, empowerment, and awakening. Please support this independent show so Kevin can continue to bring you the most inspiring and alternative interviews and videos. Go to www.themoreshow.com/donate. You can also support The More Show through Patreon by going to www.patreon.com/TheMoreShow. Or you can make a quick and easy donation from PayPal using paypal@themoreshow.com.
In 2008, a feature-length spiritual documentary called Tuning In was released. It was then the first time 6 of America's prominent channelers came together on film so viewers could gain insight into the channeling phenomenon. Now, Kevin Moore and his team are going to produce the sequel, Tuning In Now, to help waken people to become their greatest version. We are currently looking to raise $50,000 to make the best channeling documentary possible. And if you feel drawn to contribute, just go to www.tuninginnow.com.
I would have to listen to this back. I can't keep up with it right now. Do you know what I mean with what you're saying? There's a lot you said there, and yeah, I would have to listen back to it because obviously.
Let me rephrase it in a very, very quick sense. Then, cannabis opens up the whole system. It can be a truth serum. It can be a reality-inducing substance, and that is a threat to the ego, the little package that we've put together for a lot of people. And so it can lead us to be fearful. It can lead us to have a sense of paranoia. Let's leave it there for now.
Okay, well, yeah, and it could be that. It could be that. God, I mean, all I know is I don't know. Was I myself on it? I mean, I enjoyed it, but it felt like escapism a lot of time.
Yeah, okay, so there's the difference between using it wisely and not, right? Using it effectively and not using it effectively. So again, I think it's important for your listeners to, if anyone is, interested in making use of cannabis as a spiritual medicine, to understand how important it is that you work with that energy. Okay, and so there's this term that you may have come across, Kevin, if you've talked to other people about ayahuasca and so on, is set and setting. That's talked about as being very important for the use of these psychedelic or entheogenic medicines, and it applies to cannabis as well. So set is everything you bring to the situation, the encounter, your long and short-term state of mind, your attitude toward it, your intention. That intention is really important with all this stuff. What do you actually want to do with this energizing, with this gift, so to speak, from the spirit, right? And a setting is the actual setting that you do it in. And it's considered to be absolutely crucial for working with ayahuasca, psilocybin, and these other medicines, which is one of the reasons, possibly the main reason, that people from the so-called modern world are now turning to indigenous traditions to learn how those people who've used these medicines effectively for thousands of years use them, you know. So similarly with cannabis, you know, sitting around with friends yakking or whatever, or doing whatever you're doing, that's kind of like throwing yourself into the Wild West. You know, if you create a container for the work, like whether it's alone or with a group of people, one of the chapters in the book is some suggestions for how to do group ceremonies. You know, how to provide some structure. I've led group ceremonies mostly friends for several years here in Vancouver area, and I've had people come in that have, like you and many other people, they've had a relationship with cannabis in a sort of quote-unquote recreational environment for a long time in the past, and at a certain point they didn't like it. It didn't feel right to them, didn't work for them anymore. You know, again, somewhat similar to what you said about yourself. And when they've come in and they've sat down and we've created a container for it, and we just sit in meditation with a few other little activities to, you know, break up the fact that you're just sitting in silence. You can't do that all the time. And you got to move a little to keep the body from, you know, the legs from falling asleep and so on. So we sit in meditation. We might do a little bit of kind of stretching, like yoga light, you know. We might do a little chanting, like Om chanting or something like that. We might do a little what you might call shamanic drumming, like boom, 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 kind of change the brain wave kind of drumming, stuff like that. And then what happens is that the people who've had a conflictual relationship with cannabis in the past, they'll, you know, we have a sharing session at the end, and they'll say, "Oh my God, I can't believe my relationship with cannabis was really, really wrong before." You know, when you sit down, when you let go, when you pay attention, when you really enter into the moment and allow it, it's an energy medicine. When you allow it to just be, open things up energetically, it's a whole different scenario. And if I may, at this point too, maybe say something about frequency of use, because, you know, a lot of people and a lot of people that eventually come to the point where they feel like it's not healthy in their lives are maybe using it too frequently. And there's several problems with that. One is the dependency issue. It's not, you talked about addictive in the beginning of the show. I just want to clarify that the research indicates that there is no significant physiological addictive component to cannabis, but there is, for a lot of people, a very intense psychological dependence. If you want to use the word addictive for that, you can do that. People start to think that they need it, you know, for this or that. They need it for whatever, you know, and that's not healthy in most cases. The other aspect of using cannabis all the time is that there's a tolerance and both a tolerance and a familiarity effect involved. So several of the contributors to the book, Cannabis and Spirituality book that we're talking about, talk about, like, one of them is an ayahuasca shaman, actually, who works with cannabis as well. And he says cannabis has transcendent possibilities, but if he does it every day, all gone. Does not happen. So he counsels people to leave about a week between times. And they actually do cannabis ceremonies occasionally. And when they're going to do a cannabis ceremony, they go on what they call a cannabis fast. And that could be a week, 2 weeks, sometimes even 3 weeks where they smoke or vaporize or whatever, no cannabis whatsoever for that period of time. And then they do their ceremonies. And similarly, when they do their ayahuasca ceremonies, they don't. They go on cannabis fast for a week or two beforehand. So less frequent allows the plant to be sharper and clearer. And again, we're talking about spiritual use here. Like there's some discipline, there's intention, there's setting, there's a focus for this, right? It's not just, fire up a joint and away we go. Kathleen Harrison, I would almost say that her chapter in the book, right at the beginning, called "Who Is She?" Might be my favorite chapter in the whole book, and that definitely includes my own writing, which is the more prosaic kind of stuff, practical things. Kathleen talks about if you take a respectful, reverent attitude toward this plant, if you treat it as the sacred plant that it's been known as in many places for thousands of years, then it's going to treat you in a similar fashion, and you're going to benefit from that plant much more than if you just go, oh yeah, it's just a commodity. It's just, like whatever, it's like eating candy or, having a drink or something, So the attitude that you take toward it, the way you do it, the circumstances you do it in, the frequency you do it, they all have a lot to do with whether or not it's going to be able to do what it can really do, which is you get out of the way, you let your thoughts go as much as possible, and you allow the energy amplification, purification kind of energy of this plant to go to work unobstructed.
I mean, some people say that when they're smoking it, they're more creative.
Yes. You want me to speak about that?
Yeah, sure, why not?
Okay. So, well, I would say that's part of the same function that I've been talking about. Let me back up a little on this one because Joan Bello has a chapter in the book called Marijuana and the Body Mind. And she gives a kind of a layperson's description of a term that many people may not be familiar with called the pharmacokinetics of the plant. And what pharmacokinetics means is with any substance, drug, it means the processes involved as the drug enters your body, what happens in your body, and what happens as it's expelled from or leaves your body. That is the pharmacokinetics of the plant. You might just also call it the biochemical function or activity of the plant. And so what happens with cannabis, this is sort of the, I guess, more or less, again, layperson's way of describing it. As soon as you smoke it, this is different if you eat it or drink it, of course, because it takes up to a couple of hours for the effects to fully manifest. But if you smoke it or vaporize it, the effects are essentially immediate. And one thing that happens right away is there's an increase in the heart rate, partly dependent on dosage, how much the heart speeds up. But in that sense, it's a little bit like exercise. So what it's doing is it's pumping rich, freshly oxygenated blood throughout the system, balancing the blood flow to both sides of the brain so that it's neither stimulant nor depressant, but both functioning together. Many of the researchers these days use the term homeostatic balance to talk about cannabis. It creates a homeostatic balance, and this is said to be responsible for much of its medicinal benefit as well. So it's stimulating this fresh oxygen, freshly oxygenated blood flow throughout the system. And as Joan Bello puts it, also as it does that, allowing for deeper breathing, relaxation of what she calls the skeletal muscles or the oppositional muscles around the rib cage so that the lungs can fill up more, and again, even enhance that breathing even further. It's also been referred to as a vasodilator. excuse me, one of my friends and colleagues is an excellent writer, has written award-winning books, and he writes under the influence of cannabis. It's not something I can really do myself, so I asked him why. I mean, I get a lot of ideas, and I'll talk about how that works in a moment, but this particular author, he writes under the influence of cannabis. And I said, well, how does that work for you? And he just said simply it's a vasodilator. So it stimulates the flow of blood into the brain. But again, this comes back to set and setting because, well, particularly set in this case, and experience. Because for one thing, he's not getting blasted, really stoned. I quote Neil Young, the singer-songwriter Neil Young in the book, talking about he wrote most of his songs high on cannabis, and you can't fault those songs for creativity. He wrote some of the most beautiful pop songs on the planet, in my opinion. But he said he was talking about this one particular, it was a strong strain he had at one point. He said, if you smoked a little, you wrote a song. If you smoked too much, you were just toast, right? So this is another theme that comes up in the book is not always, but oftentimes less is more. Okay, so we're talking about frequency of use, the way, the place, etc., and in this case, dosage. So this particular writer that I was just mentioning, when he's writing, of course, he's writing every day, so he's smoking cannabis every day. And when you do that and you focus it into something, it's not making you spacey or, potentially, if you're experienced like he and many other people are, it's just opening up your blood flow a little bit and increasing your sharpness. That may seem like an anomaly to a lot of people who just feel like cannabis makes you stupid. But this, again, points to, skill and experience and how you actually use the plant. Again, the simple answer to the question of cannabis and creativity, how it functions that way, is that it potentially opens you more deeply into the now moment, okay? And so it allows you to connect more deeply with what you're doing, oftentimes, if you have a focus of intention or attention. One of the contributors to the book is a jewelry maker. It's a very short chapter. She doesn't go into a lot of detail, but she works with precious and semi-precious stones, sets them in silver jewelry and things like that. And she talks about how she connects with the stones in a whole other way, in a way that you might even call mystical or magical, that there's an energy that she connects with the stones that is precipitated by the cannabis. There's a chapter in the book called An Interview with Two Medicine Shamans. And one of them, Steve, talks about this energizing function. And he said they use cannabis when they lead ayahuasca ceremonies and other plants ceremonies and so on. And like these 2-3 day over the weekend kind of things. And Steve talks about how he said it opens a window and you see things that you wouldn't normally see. He can feel the energy of the group and know how to work with them in the moment more deeply, more sharply, more intelligently when he's getting this sort of enhanced information. It also, he's very tuned into the spirit energies, which sounds like you might be aware of that kind of stuff yourself. You said you're a channel. Steve talks about when they go to a new place to hold a ceremony, you have a yurt or something, they'll have 20 people lying around the edges and so on, and they open up the ceremony, and he said when they've taken some cannabis ahead of time, just before the beginning of the ceremony, he said they go in and they start the ceremony, and he said they're in a new place, they'll see he will see the ancestors of that land will come oftentimes. The ancestor spirits will show up to see what's going on, and they'll be kind of coming in like, what are you doing here, and then they'll sort of stick around long enough to see that these people know what they're doing, they have the right attitude, etc., respectful, reverent, intelligent, skillful attitude, and they go, oh, cool, So again, that was a rambly way of saying that cannabis as a spiritual, as a creative ally, has to do with its opening up the system in that sense, and then it again becomes how you channel it. how you use it that way. You're not going to use it for all functions. In my little chapter, I wrote one chapter on cannabis and creativity, and then followed it up with two other people writing about the way they use it. And in my chapter, I quote a guy who uses a superb garden. Says that he's a composer of classical music produced or performed by major orchestras in the United States. And he has this little list, I can't remember them all right now, of the things that are good with cannabis and not good with cannabis for him. And the more technical things, he said sight reading unfamiliar music, not good. Longer improvisations, not so great. Computer-based things, not so great, right? But the idea stages, the inspiration stages, and some of the other creative aspects of it are often enhanced. And perhaps I should just say that for the cynics who say, "Oh yeah, you think you get these great ideas, and then you look at it tomorrow, it just looks like nonsense or whatever." I think it's important to say that you can become over-enthused about the so-called great idea that you're having, because everything's amplified. Your enthusiasm level is potentially amplified too, right? So as the great poet bard Allen Ginsberg once said, he was a lover of cannabis. For those people that know Allen Ginsberg, the great beat poet from the 50s, 60s, and so on, he said, if you write stoned, edit sober, right? So the stonedness, as it were, can open up the channels, connect you to the muse potentially, but then you have to look at it in the cold light of day, as it were. And that's the case with your writing anyway, regardless of whether there's a plant involved. Most writers will agree that writing involves a hell of a lot of rewriting, right?
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, that's kind of I could go on about it, but I think I pretty much covered what I think of how cannabis functions potentially as a creative ally. It can stimulate ideas. I often jot them down. I don't really like to write in any at any length in cannabis, or on cannabis, I mean, but I collect these ideas and then I examine them the next day, and I find a lot of them they hold water later on. Just have to have a bit of perspective on them.
Right. Okay. Well, what about the perspective of someone whose life would never come in contact with cannabis versus someone whose life has come in contact with cannabis? I mean, if someone's life never comes in contact with cannabis, I mean, are they any less a person? Have they missed out on something, do you think?
No, I wouldn't.
Hi guys, my name's Kevin Moore and I'm the host of The Moore Show. Now it's my purpose, my passion, my mission to help you guys become your greatest version. Now you might be looking to find answers on love, connecting with your life's purpose, reuniting with a loved one on the other side, discovering your past lives, or just helping you make sense in finding your direction. Now, as a multi-dimensional channel, I can connect with higher aspects of yourself to help you in this present moment to become your best version and live your most empowered life. Now, you can book myself for a reading by going to tmspsychics.com/Kevin, or you can get a reading from one of my many gifted team of readers. The Moore Show Psychics, helping you transform your present moment to the most loving and happiest it can be. Now, I also offer a full money back guarantee, so what have you got to lose? Empower your life today.
The Moore Show connects personal development, metaphysics and consciousness tools for transformation, empowerment and awakening. Please support this independent show so Kevin can continue to bring you the most inspiring and alternative interviews and videos. Go to www.themooreshow.com/donate. You can also support The Moore Show through Patreon by going to www.patreon.com/themooreshow. Or you can make a quick and easy donation from PayPal using paypal@themooreshow.com.
So, Kevin, okay, here's a little bit of a from left field kind of take on that question. Excuse me. certainly not less of a person, of course not. But if you accept the categorization of cannabis in with the other entheogenic medicines such as psilocybin, ayahuasca, iboga, and some others, San Pedro cactus from South America, also known as huachuma, and some of the semi-synthetic substances like LSD and MMDA and others, DMT and so on. If you accept cannabis into the pantheon of those gods, as it were, then it has to do with, it's an ally. And so here's this left field take I was going to mention. This is what would you call it, a hypothesis, so to speak. We are at a particularly unique historical juncture on planet Earth right now. And this is just one way of looking at what's going on. I'm not going to create a Bible out of it. But you could say that we have reached a kind of a karmic climax, or a karmic endpoint even, of our trajectory on the planet. We've filled it up with people. We're seriously risking the environmental sustainability of the planet for the long term. It's a pretty messy place right now. There's a lot of remarkable things going on, but we're we're in a sort of a fragile situation in a lot of respects. Ancient prophecies from indigenous people all over the planet, prophecies that have been carried from generation to generation for hundreds of years, all point at this time as a time of crisis and potential. This is the good part of it, so to speak, is that there's this potential for spiritual transformation. And from that point of view, the hypothesis is that there's a very good reason why these entheogenic plants are coming into the foreground much more. I mean, ayahuasca is, 20 years ago, only a small handful of people knew anything about ayahuasca.
Right.
Now everybody knows about ayahuasca. Almost everybody's at least heard the word, and people all over the place, especially in the Western cultures, but other countries as well, are now using ayahuasca, and so people, and oftentimes this information, people say it's coming from spirit too. They're saying the spirit of the plant is saying, we're here for a reason. You guys really need us right now. So I would like to think that that's why cannabis is also getting this attention as a spiritual medicine. People are really interested in this now, over here in North America at least anyway. There are people starting up new churches, First Cannabis Church of Eugene, Oregon, and Alabama, and different things. And there are lots of people doing kind of more shamanic, little small group kind of things, and people just understanding more of this principle that I've been talking about today with you, that when you are able to calm down, be in the right kind of setting where there's not a lot of distraction and you feel safe and comfortable. This is the container we're talking about again. And you can channel that energy, you can get out of your head to a large degree, let the energy of the medicine work with you. It can open you up. And it's not even necessarily about the high of the moment, which is gone in a couple of hours. It's a gradual reconfiguration or retraining to get yourself, as I mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, more and more out of living through these secondhand stories that we package together that are sort of virtual reality, so to speak, and learning to trust the innate intelligence of the human organism. This is a key Buddhist teaching, is that we all have what they call Buddha nature, which Buddha just means awake, right? We all have this primordial or unconditioned intelligence that we have access to potentially, but we have to get all that garbage, so to speak, out of the way to do that. And cannabis as an amplifier can have that benefit.
Of course.
So it's just another, yes, go ahead.
What is that side of it, though? I mean, when we say, to get to sort of strip the ego away, right? Well, okay, you take the ego away, right? And then to me, my understanding of it is you take the ego away, then you've got the true nature of who we are, which is which is maybe a different truth for most people, but in a sense, it comes from a lot of love, and in a sense, it seems to be timeless.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
Well, I think
so. What would you call that? What is that isness that when you strip the ego away? What would you class it as?
Well, the simplest way to put it is just things as they are. You know, it's just what my old Buddhist used to teacher called it, what is. You know, he said the journey or the process of awakening is landing on what is. So what is totally independent of what we think reality is. In other words, we're learning to feel reality rather than think it out, so to speak. And again, that's where cannabis can be an ally, because it can teach how to feel in the moment more.
Of course.
Okay.
Of course.
Yeah.
No, I completely understand that. And I think your points about why it's popping up right now, becoming more popular, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, what you're saying? It does, especially in the times that we live in now. That is the main issue, and isn't it? When we get lost in ego, lost in this, that I'm Kevin, you are Stephen, but actually these are, this is just a story we've told ourselves, really, that there's something greater within us, something that I term as the soul. I mean, and other people have different words for it.
Yeah, it doesn't really matter what language you put on it.
No.
There is such a thing as has been reported by people who have experienced it for thousands of years as unconditional reality. Call it what you want, call it enlightenment, call it recognizing your oneness with all that is, call it, connected to God. It doesn't matter what language you put on it, because once you've experienced it, you know what it is. And that's the point, is that people are capable of experiencing it, and in a sense, eventually, so that's the goal, if you will, I would say, of spiritual life, is to begin to recognize our true nature and have trust in it. And that's the real key, having trust in it.
I think as well, what I went through with it was, just thinking about it now, was, I enjoyed the escapism so much that, I just didn't want to face the feelings that this reality without it created. And I knew in the end that I had to get off it, because I had to really face up to not numbing my feelings or disconnecting my feelings to myself, because the addictions that I had with it, and to face up to these feelings, which it's not always an easy thing. I'm talking about just facing up to day-to-day living, getting through that.
So that comes back to intention, right?
Yeah.
Your intention, whether to whatever degree of consciousness or unconsciousness it was, your intention was to escape, to numb out feelings, right?
Completely.
So cannabis is a gracious sort of non-judgmental ally. It will allow you to misuse it because it's going to amplify whatever direction you're already pointing. So if you're facing down that road, the road of escapism, it'll take you down there. If you're facing the road of awakening, and that's your aspiration and your intention, it can help you in that direction as well. Again, Kathleen Harrison, in her chapter in the book, Cannabis and Spirituality book, writes eloquently about that issue. She has about a 2-page little section that I think just really nails it, where she talks about how a lot of people, and interestingly enough, she says it's most common in her experience with young males. They think they found this kind of comfortable place with cannabis, and they don't want to come out of it into what she called the daylight world of relationship with the world, responsibility, and so on. They become, in her language again, wedded to the cannabis experience or the cannabis plant, and it can become more important to them than their relationships with human beings around them, and again with the so-called daylight world. So yes, it definitely has that potential to lead people astray. That's not the plant's fault. That's our intention, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. It is. Would I be ready to smoke it again? Probably not. Not. Maybe that says a lot about where my head is right now to say those words. Maybe if I was in a happier space, maybe I wouldn't be saying those things, because I'd be more...
I'm not trying to talk anybody into using cannabis. It's got to be something that people are interested in doing on their own. I would just say it's an ally. It's available. It can help if you know how to use it carefully. It's worth studying. It's worth reading, my book or our book. I would say I'm only one of 18 contributors to the book, and other material like that. It's worth trying to, if you're going to try to create a clean, safe space, take a reverent or respectful attitude, even go on this sort of tentative, perhaps as yet unconfirmed faith that maybe there's actually a kind spirit behind this plant, as it were. People who have had a lot of experience with ayahuasca and these other plant substances, they all say this. They all say there is a spirit there, or spirits, there. Some of them are not necessarily beneficial spirits too. That's another issue. But there's also wise spirit energy. A lot of people find ayahuasca talks to them, and I've had that experience with ayahuasca as well. It actually talks to you, and it tells you things. It reminds you of things. It shows you things. Cannabis, in its own way, also has that potential. So it's just an ally, take it or leave it. But the reason for doing the book is because it's so prevalent. Like I and other people would like people to know that there are other ways that can be very, very different for how to use this plant. That's the purpose of the whole book.
Yes, absolutely. Of course it is. Of course it is. And I think that's really important, because we all have friends. Well, maybe we don't all have, but I know people that are just, smoking all the time, and it just can't be good. It's and then you look at the pot industry in America as well, which is taking off now in different states, and it's I don't think they're coming from the space where you're coming from with it, in a sense, or the understanding of it, shall I say, that you're coming from. It's just a business.
Oh, absolutely. That's the nature of business, isn't it? Whenever there's money to be made, there are going to be lots of people that are out there to make it. And Americans seem to be particularly good at that and focused that way, So yeah, I'm not completely nuts about a lot of that stuff at all. They're, like in Colorado, they're just, they're very creative. They're thinking all these different ways to, market and sell cannabis. The one that I found the funniest recently is there are people. You're familiar with the term, of course, bed and breakfast, right? Like a bed and breakfast hotel, whatever. So now in Colorado, there are people promoting bud and breakfast. Like, I don't want to start my day like that, but oh boy, we can market bud and breakfast now. So you go there and you sleep overnight and you get up and they serve you a big breakfast, and along with it they fire up a doobie or give you a cannabis cookie or something like that, and you go through the rest of your day high. That's kind of I don't mean to be judgmental about it. There are people who smoke daily who it works for them, mature people who are very focused. A lot of it just has to do with how skillful you are with it. And again, to keep repeating for this theme, intention.
Exactly. But there is another side of this as well, those with medical issues as well. I mean, look how great.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Those people who are using it medicinally get a total pass on any of that frequency of use issue. And even beyond that, there are certain people, again, it's intention, right? I know people who use cannabis, they use it daily, they're not using it to escape, because I mentioned earlier this notion of homeostatic balance. Mm-hmm. But what it does for a lot of people, some people might make a case that, what I'm about to describe could in the long run be a kind of a way of bypassing some of the inner work that you might eventually need to do. I can't really say that about any particular individual. Some people, it just settles them down just enough that they can function better. Okay, so you might even call that a medicinal use or a medical use. So I know a fellow, for example, he's a internationally known scholar, prefer to keep his name out of it. He's internationally known scholar on historical religious use of cannabis. He owns a successful local business with 2 or 3 branches that sells and educates people on all kinds of different herbal substances and so on, legal ones. And he's just a very active, focused guy. Every day, he gets up in the morning, after breakfast, he has a puff.
Well, then how should it be regulated? I mean, obviously you see the expansion of the cannabis industry, but how should government regulate it, or should they?
Well, yeah. Well, it should be legal. Of course, it should be legal. There's no question in my mind whatsoever. This is several of us have used this term, the people's plant. This is the people's plant. This plant has been on the planet since long before the advent of human beings. The lineage that cannabis comes from is estimated to be between 30 and 90 million years old. It is one of, if not the most used plant on the planet, historically speaking, for all kinds of purposes, clothing, building materials, medicine, paint, cosmetics, sales, you name it. Cannabis has been used, the historical record is abundant all over Asia. For thousands of years, people have used it as a medicinal plant for a whole range of things that you wouldn't even think of, malaria, whatever, constipation, whatever. So this is our plant. It belongs to the people. We all have a right to use it. There are reasons to be careful about using it when you're young, and that's not settled actually at this point. But I would say caution is a good guideline there, if possible. Again, smoking every day and getting high all the time isn't necessarily good for anybody, let alone somebody who's 15 years old and doesn't even know who they are yet. It's considered by those who know what to do with this plant an advanced spiritual medicine, not just a toy or a little plaything. I actually forgot what the question I'm answering is now.
No, it's okay. No, just the regulation of it as well.
Oh, the regulation. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So in Canada, I don't know. Do you know this, Kevin? We're about to have legal cannabis at the federal level, across board, for all adults above age 18 or 19. They haven't settled on the age yet. And so our federal government is actively engaged right now in determining how they're going to regulate it. One thing hopefully they're saying they're probably going to do this, they're not committing yet, is they're going to allow people to grow their own plants, but only a limited number, like 4. I think that's a great idea. As I say, it's the people's plant. I would love to see people being able to grow their own plants. And then there would be this wonderful, you could call it an industry. It would be a whole stream of investigation, I guess you could say, for, like gardeners who are communicating with each other, or photographers or whatever. How do you grow? What are the best strains? What are the best things to do with your plant, et cetera, et cetera? It's got wonderful possibilities for the sharing of information. And it's also going to be a great way for people to save money, especially medicinal users, because, if you have, people that need it for certain serious conditions, they have to use a lot of the plant to mitigate their symptoms. And that can be very expensive if you're having to buy it. So if you can grow your own, it's wonderful. So that we have a model in terms of your question about regulation. We have a model in it's not legal at the moment, but it's what we call a gray area, because in Vancouver, for example, the police are just leaving the dispensaries alone. We call them dispensaries. They're ostensibly for medical reasons, but it's pretty easy to become a member of one here in Vancouver. Yeah. And the cops just leave them alone. And we have about 100 of them in Vancouver. And a lot of us think that is a great model. You have small outlets so that it doesn't become dominated by giant corporations. Small outlets allow a significant number of producers, but inspect them carefully, because there's a lot of possibilities for putting contaminants and pesticides into the plant. So you need a rigorous system of inspection and approval and certification, in my opinion. We have already in Canada, we already have federally legalized medical cannabis. But for that, you have to go through a medical doctor, an MD, and you have to have a fairly obvious condition for it. So
of course.
maybe 30 or 40,000 people maybe have that in Canada. And because of that, we have 30 licensed producers, they call them. So that's what they're looking at, is how many producers are they going to allow across the country, etc.
Do you know, it's funny in Amsterdam where, you're allowed to sell it, you're not allowed to buy it. So the shops who are legally allowed to sell it, but they're not allowed to buy it. How crazy is that? So
you need the whole system from start to finish in place, and that's why it needs to be fully legalized. Holland's in a kind of a weird situation. What I read about Holland is it's not actually technically legal, period, because they have agreements with the rest of the European Union, which don't permit that. It's just de facto legislation. It's not actually legal legalization, as I understand it.
It's so strange. It's so strange. What would you say then is the most important message of your book?
Well, I think I've already said it, so thank you for asking. I could maybe sum it up in 25 words or less, so to speak. Basically, cannabis has an ancient and widespread history of spiritual use on this planet. It has the benefits of cannabis as a spiritual ally have everything to do with set and setting, i.e. your intention, your experience, the conditions that you do it in, the frequency that you do it, and how you understand how to work with the mind, which is how to get out of your own way, as it were. With the major entheogenic medicines, they talk about watch out for head traffic, so to speak, meaning your thinking mind, and that's a basic spiritual principle anyway. So the kind of core of this is, again, somewhat in layperson's terms, cannabis can be thought of as an amplifier, neutral in that sense. It's like you're given this power, you're given this gift, and it's all about what you do with it. And it can be mischanneled, or it can be channeled effectively, and has this potential to bring us more deeply into the moment. We can't depend on it. The more we rely on it, the less it's going to offer us. It's a way to remind us, in a sense, even that there is a way to be present, out of our heads for the most part. And as Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, said, the ideal relationship with your mind, your thinking mind, is as a tool that you could pick up when you need it and put down when you don't. Whereas for most people, the thinking mind is kind of almost our enemy a lot of the time, in that it just is constantly throwing thoughts out to obscure this unconditioned reality. So cannabis or no cannabis, are anyone who actually wants to really wake up and be who you are fully, needs to understand that reality is accessed in the space between this thinking mind that's constantly churning things up and creating stories that keep us in this little cocoon that I talked about earlier. So something like that. Cannabis is a spiritual medicine when used wisely. It has immense potential to help when it's used effectively. And in fact, a couple of people in the book talk about it as a potential sacrament of the new universal religion, because it's about direct experience. It's not about creating a giant body of, dogmatic ideas or anything. It's non-hierarchical. It's not about having great potentates at the top, the Pope of cannabis or something. It's the people's plant. We can work with it. It's one of the safest plants on the planet. You can overdose in a psychological sense, of course, especially if you eat or drink it. But that's all to do with the skill you bring to how to use it, how much to take, how often to take, where and when, how, and all that, right?
Absolutely. No, absolutely. And do you have a website address as well?
Yes, thanks for asking, Kevin. It's cannabisandspirituality.com, www.cannabisandspirituality.com. And I'm a little lazy about adding new material to that. I keep an events media page. So there's, when I'm giving a talk, I put that on there. I also have put up interviews like this one when I get the link for them or the audio for them or whatever. So there's a few of those on there. And I also encourage people that have interesting stories or information to share. I'm not the only person that knows anything about the People's Plan by any stretch. And so I encourage people to submit potential posts, and if I think it's useful, I'll put it on. I've done that before. And similarly, an even easier thing to do in that regard is to subscribe to the Facebook group, Cannabis and Spirituality. And I share posts a lot. I write the occasional posts, and I welcome, and I really mean that, welcome people to submit shares and their own posts, testimonials, personal work, whatever, insights they've had, questions, concerns, etc., etc. So, yes, thank you. And the book, again, is called Cannabis and Spirituality. And the subtitle is An Explorer's Guide to an Ancient Plant Spirit Ally. I noticed it's on available at amazon.co.uk, so it's on the British version of Amazon, as well as the American and Canadian and French and German and Italian versions. And actually, let me say one more thing about that really briefly, please, if I may. And that is, I have a real empathy for bookstores these days. Because they're suffering badly. It's very difficult to make money these days with a bookstore, especially a smaller bookstore. So if anyone is interested in picking up the book, I would encourage them to first look at their local bookstore and ask them if they would bring it in or even order it, just to support small bookstores. Anyway, that's my little...
No, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much. Well, look, Stephen Gray, just thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Kevin. And, as you noticed, I can talk about these things at length. So thank you for being a really good listener and allowing me to just, giving me a long leash, as it were. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Well, we've come to an end on today's show. Don't forget that you can listen and watch all our past interviews on the More Show's official YouTube channel. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel for new daily shows. You may also find out more on our past and upcoming guests by going to themoreshow.com, and do like us on Facebook and Twitter for the latest updates. So until next time, be safe.